Franklin Park has an interesting history. It started out actually as the Franklin County Fairgrounds. Acreage was added in the 1870s and it became the first home of the Ohio State Fair. But by the 1890s, it became a public park. And that's really the period of time when the conservatory was built, the landscape design happened, and this became one of the jewels of Columbus.
I learned in doing a little bit of research was that the ancient Romans, they would used to take mica rock and they would cut really thin sheets, and that would make their version of a glass house because they wanted to eat their citrus fruit all year round. So Europeans later kind of perfected that, and they were the first to really build these grand glass houses all across Europe, and unfortunately a lot of them have been destroyed.
The transformation began with Ameriflora, which was an international flower exhibition held in Columbus in 1992. And that's when the Palm House was restored, the additions were put on the building. It became an educational center, it became a place that people could come and experience plants and Ameriflora and all kinds of transformations.
In 1925 and then again in 1930, you may have heard that there were wild animals that were living in the conservatory inside the Palm House, and it's true. Robert Wolfe, who was with the Dispatch, he bought first reindeer and then 5 years later bought wild animals from a defunct circus, and I'm talking lions and tigers and bears, and he was going to contribute them to the first Columbus Zoo when the zoo wasn't ready yet. So they were housed right here in the Palm House over the winter.
I think having the Palm House as part of the conservatory's visitor experience is so important, whether it's a wedding guest or a family who's come to spend the afternoon in the winter to get away from the cold. It's such an important architectural feature in this community. It was built in the late 1800s and is such an important architectural gem in Columbus, and it really is the anchor for this institution.
I grew up in the Philippines, and it's a very tropical country. Most days are in the 90s, 95. You can really feel the weight of the weather and the humidity. I moved to Ohio, and of course the first thing I noticed was fall. The fall colors, it's very different from Asia. I've never seen anything like it. And somebody suggested that I go visit the Franklin Park Conservatory, and I just stood there with all the grand stature of the Palm House, and it just felt and smelled and looked perfect. It's very tropical. I could feel the humidity. I could feel that sense of like, wow, there is life amidst all the cold and dreary of wintertime. This in here was just a beautiful and peaceful place.
One of the things that a lot of people don't know about the James Turrell lighting installation is that it is one of James Turrell's 5 major architectural installations in the world. The other architectural installations by James are in Japan, Germany, France, and Switzerland, and since 2008 here at Columbus, Ohio in the John F. Wolfe Palm House. And so I think that's something very special that we should all appreciate, and it's one of those features in this community that makes us very unique.
James Turrell's lights actually accentuate the architecture, accentuate the exterior. You can see it as you're driving by, as you're in the park, as you live around the park.
Even before we became a nonprofit organization in 1993, families were coming here and enjoying the holidays, and we still hear that today. We hear that about the beautiful 15-foot poinsettia tree that they came here with their grandmother and they took a family photo. We hear it about Blooms and Butterflies, which started in 1994. Parents who come here today remember coming as a child in 1994 and 1995, and that I think is amazing because it really reinforces that Franklin Park Conservatory and Botanical Gardens is part of the tradition in Columbus, Ohio.
The bulk of the building that you see, which is the reinforced concrete brick facade, that was built and completed in 1928 as part of the EBCO manufacturing facility. And then over the years, things like courtyards and other, outdoor spaces just basically got roofed over. And of course, with our location to the railroad tracks, it sort of creates the building in the shape of a wedge. But this building has been, I would say, I believe that the last edition of this building was built in 1954.
The first time I came in the building, I knew this was it. The high ceilings, the general architecture of the place, the fact that there was so much of the original still here, it wasn't too pristine. It felt like a place I could work, and that it's a place where things have always been made. And I feel that energy when I come into this building. It's I think it kind of just flows and filters from other studios and from the building itself.
The first time I came to Franklinton was around 2009. I had just accepted my job offer at Ohio State, and I was looking for apartments. I had gone to various different neighborhoods around the downtown area. I wanted to be relatively close to campus where I'd be working. And what impressed me most about Franklinton was that it was this blank, empty slate. I was standing on this side of the river near COSI, and I had this phenomenal view of downtown Columbus, and I just didn't understand why there was nothing here. Well, the space was not built out at all when we saw it. We did see the sawtooth windows, and we just thought that it had endless possibilities.
My daughter just recently was married at Strongwater, and it was a fabulous experience. Just the people that worked Strongwater were wonderful, but the building itself was such a great experience as well. The week after the wedding, this woman was sitting up at the over top of the place that they have the weddings, the outdoor courtyard, and she was going, "Oh, weddings in here? Who would have a wedding in here?" And she goes, Jane turns to her friend and says, "Well, here's Judy. Her daughter had one here last weekend. Ask her."
I walked into the building one morning and it smelled like a swimming pool. I've never smelled, it brought me back to my childhood. And I thought, wow, it smells like chlorine in here. This is interesting. And I started hearing a noise, and I started kind of trying to find where the noise was coming from. And I opened these doors to a room, and there were literally geysers of water shooting out of the floor all over the place. And of course, I freaked out, and turned out to be a sprinkler main had busted.
There are times when it rains heavily that there's rain coming in someplace, but that became inspiration for me, especially for my exhibit. There were these great tarps in the ceiling that were able to catch drops coming in from kind of a larger area of the ceiling, and then hoses. I think this is just pure genius. They connected hoses to the bottom of these tarps, and then the hoses drained into these big barrels, and I just found that so creative, a creative way to deal with a big problem instead of moving a bucket all around. And so really my huge piece that I did in the ceiling of the space, I did that to suggest water above the gallery space. In fact, I wrote a poem about the space and how the space inspired me, and it was called Drip, Drip, Drip.
I mean, for me, 400 West Rich and the Franklinton neighborhood as a whole is all about creativity. The Steam Factory has already a diverse collection of faculty. We have 123 members spanning 80 different departments and offices, including anything from oncology, law, Spanish, Portuguese studies, linguistics, math, computer science, robotics, you name it. So for us, this is what our space is all about. It's a collaboration facilitator. It's a shared collaborative research and outreach space. And we hold activities in here that both promote research across disciplines and then better communicate that research to the public through our outreach and educational events that we hold in this space. Being in 400 West Rich and Franklinton connects us to a greater creative class in the neighborhood, the artists, the makers, and so on.
Peter Eisenman's design for the Wexner Center was chosen among 5 invited submissions, and at the time, I think most people are aware, he had not really built a major publicly scaled building.
So we got this idea of doing, as it were, a non-building. In other words, that we would cut between Mershon and Weigel, and instead of making an object like Graves and Pelly and McKinnell, we would make a non-object. We would make a sort of a grid, a building of absence, let's say. And then they asked for elevations, and we realized we couldn't do elevations of our project because there were no elevations. I mean, where do you make an elevation of this? So what we did was we weren't allowed to make a model, okay? And we asked the jury, could we bring material like slides and other things to make our presentation? And they said, you can bring everything you want, but anything you bring, you've got to take away, okay? So it's not going to be considered part of the competition. So we made this model, we didn't tell anybody, we hid it away so the competitors wouldn't see it. And when we were asked to come in to present, we went and got this big model like this, beautifully detailed model that we made. We brought it in, and at that moment we had won the competition because the jury couldn't stop. They didn't want to see the presentation, they didn't want to see our slides. They just wanted, could we just see the model? And when we were done with the presentation, we said, thank you very much, it's been great, etc. And we started to go and take the model, and they said, no, 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 you leave the model here. And we knew we had it.
Peter, uniquely among the competitors, decided to literally wedge this building between 2 pre-existing buildings on campus, the 1950s Mershon Auditorium and Weigel Hall, an example of 1970s brutalism. He literally fit the Wexner Center in the very odd space between these 2 buildings. We are connected to both of them through these labyrinthian corridors on either side of our building, which also makes for some interesting challenges from time to time. But what it meant was that the building from the exterior is a very different experience than the building from the interior.
My first experience with the space was when I was a junior or sophomore in architecture school. And there'd been a lot of excitement over the competition for the design of the building, and a lot of excitement during the construction. I was in studio late one night, and a bunch of us decided it'd be a really good idea to sneak into the building. And we somehow found ourselves in the basement, the lower level in the black box, and the building was about 75% done at that point. So it was really interesting to see the relationship between the rawness of the construction, basically what's hidden underneath all of this stuff, relative to everything I'd seen and the renderings and the model. And it really made me appreciate what a feat of architecture this building really is.
I mean, truthfully, I don't think much about the Wexner Center architecture. I take it for granted sometimes. I've been here so many times over the years that you almost just accept it as a great piece of architecture, but you don't really stop and reflect as why it's a great piece of architecture. It allows the viewer to engage with the architecture just by how you have to find your way through the space. You have to move around the columns or the grid. You have to intentionally find your way through the building. It's not a natural progression. It's forced.
There is a tremendous amount of sort of architectural presence and colliding grids, a kind of fenestration that wasn't initially clear to me in terms of its coding, the fact that floor materials changed mid-gallery and often at sort of odd angles. And I really kind of scratched my head and thought, what were they thinking?
I'm a graphic designer, and white space is a big part of what I do, and the Wexner Center's space and gallery area really balances that well, and it feels like you've got lots of room to kind of to see and experience all of the artwork without overwhelming the art itself and allowing it to be the art itself to be the focal point and not the building.
There is something, albeit, as Barbara Kruger once said, kind of overly determined about the Wexner Center that is also incredibly generous and generative, so that it really inspires all of us to think about how the art and the building are going to interrelate, how they will both in the end be stronger for the presence of the other.